Hey everybody. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of HITRUST Secrets, where we break down anything you want to know about HITRUST, but nobody told you or you didn't think to ask. So we're asking today. Just got a small crew, but dedicated crew here today. We're a little bit before the top of the hour, so we may have other people join as we continue on. But so I have a question, but I wanted to open it up to Stephen, Brian, or Donna. Do any of you have a question that you want to get answered? No. All right. So
no burning questions today.
Okay. Well, I actually do. I was like, oh, good, this is coming up, so I can ask this question. So I'm starting on a new assessment, and of course, you have to get through the no matter what size of assessment you always have to go through the organizational discussion and kind of the overview, and knowing that it's going to be part of the HITRUST report that it comes out, when we get certified for this. So I have a question about that and kind of like, where do you normally go to get that information? Do you go to a marketing team? Do you go to the CISO? Do you look on the website for this organization and kind of pull in what they do? And then further on that, questions about the facilities and, systems is easy because but as far as I've got, this system is 100% in AWS, and there's really the people that are involved in the scope of this are not in a corporate office, they're all remote workers. So what do I put for facilities and external, I think it's external sources or how do I match that so that it's very clear that this is an AWS cloud environment that these people are working in? Open it up for answers.
So are you talking about the bit in my CSF as part of the, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. In my CSF, when you go in there, there's always the, describe the organization, and then you have to describe like how the information security portion of that. And the information security portion of that is easy. I can get that from the CISO. It's pretty straightforward, but it's that whole, just describe the organization in general, knowing that it's going to be part of the HITRUST report, and I am not a marketing person.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have personally gone to the marketing team, although I take a more restricted subset. So I scrape out a lot of the marketingese and just go with the core aspect of what is this business and how is it positioned in the market? Because in this case, it's not about selling the product, but it crucially is about clearly communicating to HITRUST how the company is positioned in the market. And that is core, because if you if you're saying, here's my scope, but then you turn around and you're selling the world to the market, that's not cool. HITRUST wants to understand how your product or service or company or whatever touches that scope is positioned in the marketplace. So they do want some of that. Like I said, I tend to go in, really zero in on what is the product / service and how is it positioned in the market, and get that in there, and then scrape everything else.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm comfortable with the system. I've been involved in that, but that's kind of where I usually falter, because it's like I can give 2 or 3 sentences. This company does healthcare clinical technology, but I definitely to me it's kind of that fine line, because knowing that this is probably going to be what's going to be in a press release or something like that. You don't want to have it just be the functional piece of it as much as the inspirational or aspirational of where the vision is of what this product is that's getting HITRUST certified.
Yeah.
As from the assessor side, one of the things we'll look at always, if they have a SOC 2 report, we just cheat and steal the first paragraph of section 3 under the overview of operations.
Cool.
That's if they already have a SOC report, as far as we're concerned, that's done, because that's been handled through that process with AICPA guidance. If they don't have one, it tends to be marketing. I always just tell them, I want, give me the elevator pitch. If you're at a conference and somebody says, ooh, what does your company do? Oh, well, we give this service. We're known for this. But a lot of times, HITRUST is the second. SOC 2 tends to be that first kind of wade into
Hmm.
compliance. And if they do have a SOC report, Section 3 is pretty well structured under the AICPA. And we
Okay.
just steal. And I was actually just looking at one of my examples, and that's absolutely what I did.
Okay.
And
Out of
Perfect. Good. Yeah, that's helpful.
AICPA, at least the SOC 2 assessors that I've worked with do tend to like to, kind of scrape out, like I was saying, the marketing ease. So SOC 2 reports are really good. If they've already been through the assessor lens, then
Hmm.
they've already got the overly marketing speak removed, with a
Right. Yeah. I mean,
fairly
I
good
definitely don't
focus.
want, there's zero vulnerabilities in the, or whatever the claim is, that definitely. But I find myself if I don't kind of take that bigger review for that company overview, that I'm repeating myself because I'm just focused on the system, because that's kind of the
Mm.
realm that I've been playing in, is the system, the system, the system, and not, okay, take a step back and kind of look. But that's very helpful to look, because I do believe
Yeah.
they've done a SOC too. So I
Yeah.
will definitely do that, and I'll
Grab
look
that
like,
section.
yeah,
The
exactly. I'll look
assessors
like,
will have already said, no, that's too marketing.
right, exactly.
Say it more simply.
It'll it'll be likely Section 3. I don't think there's any flexibility on the SOC 2 report. I think that has to be Section 3. It's the overview of operations.
Okay.
We've been getting a lot back lately to update that. QA has been very aggressive about double checking not just the facts, but they've actually come back and said, is this the language your client wants in their report? So
Hmm.
they don't push back and like you have to change it, but
Hmm.
they've been very aware. And it used to be they didn't look at these fields very closely. So
Hmm.
we're surprised how many tasks we get back during QA
Hmm.
that say, this is wordy, or maybe this will be in the report. Make sure your client knows that. It's kind of their little
Hmm.
nudge that maybe they don't think it's what it should be. But
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you get paranoid, because then you're like, wait, what's wrong with it?
well, and you push
Where's
on it
it?
at the
What's it missing?
beginning. There's a
Right.
lot of times I'm like, just get anything in there because I have to get busy working on the report.
Right.
And then circling back at the end, we end up in a bad spot with it. So it's good to tackle right the first time, but there's a lot of times I just get to the point where I'm like, come on, anything, because I can't work on anything till I approve that.
Right.
Just give me two sentences and let's go because we got deadlines. So it is
Yeah.
they've been paying better attention.
Yeah. So that's nice that High Trust does come back and say, hey, are you sure those two sentences are enough? Is it,
Hmm.
because they probably have gotten that feedback where people are like, I didn't know it was going to be in the report. And that's what I've always been cognizant of. They're like, yeah, don't make it too jargony. But don't, to your point, Donna, don't, oversell and, yes, we do everything. And you're like, but this thing's focused on, this one tiny piece. So then switching
Yeah.
gears to the scope, as far as the facilities, like I said, systems is pretty easy, but when the facility, if the system is 100% cloud based, what do you put for facilities versus, there's like that third section is like external, um, is it, I'll have to go back and look at it.
It's
That's
called services.
services outsourced.
Yeah, services outsourced.
Steven's
Mhm.
yeah.
I got my CSF open right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, platform and systems. Second part is facilities. Third part is services outsourced. Scope platforms, facilities for the 100%. So we're 100% in the cloud, right? So no data resides
Right.
on-prem. We have Microsoft Azure, and that's it.
Okay. So what do you put for the facility? Do you put Azure or do
Yeah,
you?
as
Okay.
specific Azure data centers.
Okay. So the specific Azure data center that you're living in. And then do you have anything for the um services outsourced, or do you really just are like, well, now I've described it here in the facility, so I'm good?
And services outsourced. Yeah, that's just Microsoft Azure, a third
Okay.
party
So kind of a
cloud
repeat.
provider. Yeah.
Okay.
And then for the facilities portion of it, Microsoft is very protective about the physical address locations of all of their things. So like had to do some searching and I've got city and state and that's about it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I actually raised to HITRUST when they insisted on putting the facility information in the letter, and I raised it quite firmly, and said, I didn't think it should be there. And it went round and round, and it doesn't look like it is made a difference at all. But I really pushed back, and I is it who's the head of QA? Is it Ida?
Yeah.
She wasn't happy with my opinion, but there's no reason for it to be there. It also looks like the way it's positioned, it says, here's the scope of this HITRUST certification. And then it lists the platforms and facilities, and it somehow looks like I'm certifying,
Azure,
Azure or AWS platforms, which I'm totally not, never have. So I think it's incorrect on a couple of levels. One, it's giving designated locations of what is clearly confidential information. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this. And two, it's suggesting that we're somehow including those facilities in the scope of this HITRUST certification, and that is also not the case. So I took issue with it on two levels. They said they hadn't received any negative feedback from anybody else except me.
No. Right.
So
well, guess what I'm going to do.
Wait, what's this doing here? Exactly.
Yeah, and because it only came up, it was only introduced 2 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. And I spotted it immediately. I'm like, what's that? What's that doing there? That doesn't belong there. And they just were not having any of it. So, if I was the only one, then there wasn't much I could do about it, because Ida was just, this is what it needs to be. But I think it's not a perfect solution. I'm not quite sure what their goal was in doing that. I think there's if they're just trying to show that these things are cloud-based, which seems kind of redundant to me, but I think there's other ways to approach that. If they just want to say these are cloud-based through Amazon, through AWS versus Azure, they're located in North America versus outside of North America, I could see something like that, or within the designated state of the scope versus if it's outside the designated state. Because I know that some organizations are specifically going for, we keep everything in state, whatever those laws are, versus going outside. But I just feel like there's other ways to slice it.
Is there something within, because Microsoft Azure has their own HITRUST certifications.
They do.
But it can't be across all of their data centers, right? I don't know. That's why I'm asking. I wonder if the point
I know
of asking,
with AWS it was.
Was it?
I mean, and AWS is, because when you read their HITRUST report, because if you're a customer of them, you can read it under NDA, but it describes every location, so every physical data center, and
I'll have to
lists all of them.
I'll have to look at Azure's HITRUST report to see if every single facility, because the question I was going to get at is, what if we use a data center that's not HITRUST certified? Kind of like an inheritance type of thing.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that, yeah.
Well,
I could see this being, oh, sorry, Susan. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think that's part of why there's that whole process of submitting the inheritance request to your cloud provider, so that they can look at your account. And I think would say it would, if they are only certified in certain locations, it would be incumbent upon them to know that you're operating in those locations, so that they could accept your external inheritance request. And if they weren't certified there, because maybe it's a brand new one, or it's outside the country or something like that, that they would have to reject it and give you the comment, well, we can't because that's not in the scope of our assessment.
Yeah, but the other thing is, there's no issue with it being included in my CSF, as far as this is where we're storing the data, because HITRUST does need to know that. My only issue was that it was included in the letter.
The letter,
even the simple letter. So that's out the door, regardless of what documentation you're providing for your HITRUST certification. That's out there and very visible. So that was my concern, is the visibility and positioning of it, not that HITRUST needs it to validate. They
Maybe
do. I accept
maybe
that.
that can be an enhancement in the future where like you can request a one-off letter that hides certain facility information because from a letter standpoint, like maybe like the example you gave before, state might matter in some contexts, right?
Right.
Hmm.
Definitely country would matter
Hmm.
in most contexts, but like as far as like the address or the city, probably not. Or
Hmm.
at least give the choice to be able to have one with and one without.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good call.
Cool. And then for the, for the rest of the facilities, if I'm assuming that you put your home office or your corporate headquarters there as well, even if the people that are in the scope of this particular system aren't there. And I'm thinking like for a client that may be US based, but also have, the development team or whatever is outsourced. I'm assuming that you would put the US home office as a facility, even though they're not, or your only
Yeah,
facility is your cloud.
only facility is
Okay.
the cloud. Yep.
Hmm.
If you
But
list it in,
that's not, sorry, that's real quick. That's not to say that they didn't ask any facility questions in it, right? Because there's still such privilege access and facility access and other things that we had to answer regardless of that not existing within the facilities scope.
if you list it in facilities, they will drag it into scope. When
Okay.
in QA, they'll come back and say, "Well, you listed it. We have to test it." So,
Hmm.
if it's the
Okay.
guidance I always give is if it's non-privileged access, if the internet's the same as if they were sitting at Starbucks, they still have to VPN, they still have to all of that, and there's never any sensitive data stored, processed, or transmitted through that site, leave it off.
Okay. Cool. Makes sense. Good. I want to make sure. Yeah, you definitely don't want to be, pulling things in, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, let's travel to St. Louis, Missouri to see that. But it's really just, the executive team, because that happened like in a customer that, or when I was full time at a client, we basically everybody went remote for for COVID. And then the only thing they were going to have was the executive leadership team in leased space, but because they still wanted a Nashville address. And so everybody else was offsite. And so it was like, well, we don't give the executives access to PHI typically. So they typically are not in scope for, you're not going to give them access to your claims processor and things like that. So, but yeah, good advice. Good to know. Thank you for that. Anybody have any other questions?
I did want to mention one of the reasons I know facilities are there is because when you get to really big organizations, they'll maybe have a data center where an exception is found, and we do track when you fill in a system or a platform, you have to say which facility it's at.
Hmm.
So that's where I think that they keep all of that information so you can correlate. The client can be educated on, okay, this data center wasn't up to where it needed to be, but my application's in these other two, so I don't care. I think it's part of making that report valuable to the CISO for the 2% of people that actually review the reports they get instead of checking the box and putting them in a drawer.
That makes sense. Well, cool. Now I'm well armed for scoping my assessment. Thank you.
Hmm.
So the other question that I had that came up, it wasn't nearly as burning of a question because it's definitely more of a philosophical. But I started thinking because everybody's talking artificial intelligence, AI is this, AI is that. Um, and I know I've talked to some people probably 6 months ago, maybe even 8 months ago, about, how they're automating or adding some artificial intelligence into the auditing process. And so curious to see everybody else's take on, what would you hand over to AI and what would you be like, nope, I'm just going to make sure that a human person is paying attention to it in the audit process.
So how are they using AI for auditing process? Like to like you copy all your evidence into the AI and it spits it back out in a format
Well, she
Like,
didn't get into specifics as far as how she was doing it, but she was just like, this is just going to be a game changer. And so that was kind of my point as I was like, are you having it evaluate your evidence, against a requirement? Say, hey, the requirement is this, and I have, this report verify that it has all of the elements. I mean, I've used AI in creating documentation, because I that mantra in my head is always, AI, at least the current form that we have, the free stuff is an English major and not, an auditor or an accounting major or anything like that. So that's kind of what I have in my head. But I was just curious to see, are other people doing more with it? Or is it really,
Yeah.
kind of just leaving it to, hey, I've got this. Like when I do the scope doc, I'm going to probably have AI, revise it and make it a little bit nicer sounding, so I'm not ending with a preposition or something. But I'm not going to go, hey, evaluate this evidence against this control and make sure, you tell me it's valid.
yeah,
So,
some of
oh, jump
go
in,
ahead.
Steve.
No, you.
So I've used it for things like converting large data sets from Excel into, so a lot of times either work papers or summary pages can be used for HITRUST, like at the individual control level, saying, so I've got one client that does summary pages for each control, right? And it'll have the control, what's in there, which policy procedure, and everything else it's linked to, and that sort of thing. It'll have a summary of how the evidence meets whatever it is, and then the inheritance. Now, with the exception of how, the screen capture of the evidence and how that specifically meets it, the other stuff is fairly consistent. So that can be, that's in a spreadsheet or can be dragged kind of in and out of spreadsheets, but you can actually use AI to say, right, I want to take this information and create all of, at least templates, basic versions that you still have to maybe do some manipulation of, but you don't have to write them all or do manual copy and paste. That's fabulous because you can, yes, it'll take a few different attempts to make sure you've got everything, kind of columns organized, and you've got to structure the Word document so that it goes. But once you do that, a couple of different attempts on the instructions with Chat GPT, that's fine. Don't include any sensitive information,
right?
But
Absolutely,
the stuff that I'm
right.
talking about is very straightforward. It's just setting up the basics of then going through and going, yes, right, yeah, that's still on that page, that's still on that page, we're good there, okay, and looking through it from that perspective. So that I thought was kind of a saves a mass amount of time if you're talking 400, 600, 800 controls.
Yeah.
That's a big time saver. Go ahead and multiply 800 by 20. 20 minutes. Let's say we can only spend 15 or 20 minutes on each one of those pages. It saves time.
Yeah, to your point, what I was going to say earlier, you beat me to it. I would be very cautious about use cases of any type of sensitive, proprietary, or anything that might harm your business relationship because
Yeah.
more often than not, we, me being the assessed entity and you guys being the assessors, don't necessarily own the models in which we're using to help us in our everyday tasks. So if I don't know, like it seems very sensitive to be able to potentially say this particular client uses this particular control, even the AI knowing, right, that type of thing.
Right. Or learning,
makes
kind of
me
gleaning
nervous.
from it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
Like maybe
exactly.
you've made the evidence anonymous, but it can still kind of glean from it and
Right.
learn.
Yes.
And
I definitely wouldn't use AI to like store any type or manipulate the actual evidence portion of it. Like I don't, despite our heavy use of it, especially if we have AI products, without particular controls to control the negative consequences or at least the likelihood of those consequences, I would definitely not use those. But on the other hand, I do use it to QA myself often. Like, hey, this is what it says, here's what I'm doing, what am I missing type of thing. And I had to give it specific instructions to not sugarcoat or fluff anything that I'm doing, because like ChatGPT will be like, "You're doing great. Just believe in yourself." I'm like, no, that's not actually not what I'm asking. I don't need to be like built up.
That's all
Um,
right.
like I need for you to tell me where I'm wrong, right? And how I
Mm,
can improve, right?
mm,
Which is the whole point of like security and compliance, right? Like here's where we are,
yes.
here's where we want to go, which means there's probably going to be a gap or a cap, right? That we can actually work on. And so that's my main use case as far as like
Okay.
large language models go there.
Yeah, and she's probably somebody that can eventually get, a data analyst or somebody to create the model for her. She
Hmm.
was an instructor at UT, doing a lot of auditing, and that's what I was kind of like, gosh, I wonder. I'm going to check
Yeah.
back in with her and go, hey, based on that conversation from a while ago, what are you using, and how do you see that efficiency? She's
Yeah.
probably going to patent
Is
a
is
product in
that
a
somebody
day or
who
two.
could be is that somebody who could be like a guest speaker and like showcase?
You
That
know what?
sounds
I can
good.
check with her. I can definitely check
Yeah.
with her. I know she's done some stuff with ISACA and that group, so I can definitely
Nice.
check with her and say, "Hey, come on and tell us what you're doing with AI."
Yeah. That sounds great. I mean, I think AI could also be very useful with the new CVIDs in terms of, kind of working through older reports or, new versions of old reports to go in and say, right, tell me, which page numbers you find these CVIDs on. It just shortens that task a little bit. You can use the search and stuff, but sometimes if it's depending on how it's structured in the report, it'll bring up other things. So, just kind of going through and saying, right, dump out this information here, do the bridge analysis, so that you can map the older frameworks to the whatever your client's using.
Okay. Yeah, I want to make sure I'm not just, I'm still in that manual copy paste mode, and everybody's like, "Oh no, I just, load this policy document in, and it tells me which high trust controls are in there or not in there, or
Yeah.
whatever." So that would be
There may be some, I would be cautious, but there may be some if you go too high trust or if you kind of verify if they have any partners in AI where you could run evidence. I would be cautious using a non-high trust
mhm.
partner to even as a starting point for evidence, just because that feels exposed from the clients, to Stephen's point, it just feels exposed. So I have heard that some of the assessment firms are using AI to support the analysis. I think I would want to, if I were a client, I'd want to understand a lot more about that process,
Mhm.
and where exactly my data is going. Because even, with the assessors, when I was client side, absolutely. I mean, I was asking, all the questions, got the security, um, documents for Smartsheet, got them for Trust, got them all in order, so that we weren't putting our documents on anything that we didn't have absolutely the right documentation for.
Mhm.
And if you give them to an assessor and the assessor turns around and runs them through a platform that you don't have visibility on, that is not on. That is not on.
Right. Well, and then, I mean, I was just kind of wondering, because even something simple like, um, just taking like a simple endpoint protection control and says, antivirus will be installed. Well, you know, is there something that you're downloading that you can just say, hey, here are the reports that I got from McAfee or Norton or whatever, tell
Mm.
me that it's on. I mean, would you even use it for that? Or are you just going to go, nope, I'm going to make sure I look and see, what that configuration flag should be, or would you be like, I don't even have to know what that configuration flag could be, because ChatGPT will figure out what that is for that antivirus and then go check that report and see if it's there.
So you're putting or not you specifically, but in this scenario, the client's security reports are being put in an
No, I was just
external.
wondering hypothetically, like if I was, because to know if endpoint protection is turned on, if you've got a Windows machine, there's you have to go to Intune or something like that and look there. But you have to know that as an auditor. You have to go, oh, okay, client, this is what I'm looking for when I say I need to make sure antivirus is installed on your Windows computers. For a Mac, there's a different thing I have to go look at. And I was wondering if anybody's using like artificial intelligence to go, I as an auditor don't need to have that knowledge. I just have to say, hey, learning module, I need to make sure that this is on these computers. You tell me what you need to see or something.
So the question might be more of like, if we have a brand new auditor who reads the control, go to an AI and say, how would this normally be implemented?
Right.
And ask the question as opposed to
Well,
uploading evidence.
I mean, that's kind of what I do now. If if it's something like, especially because I'm not a network person. So any of those network controls, I have to be like, okay, how would I know that this was this or this was that? So I'm already kind of doing, because I mean, Google search is now, coming back as artificial intelligence, they're like, hey, let me give you a summary of what that is. So I'm already doing that. But what I was wondering is if there's a way that I could just kind of go, okay, here's the control, here's what they're doing, and then, is there a way, or could it say, yeah, have them run this report, and is anybody doing something like that, where do you feel comfortable enough to do that, or are you like, nope, there's so much other information on there that you would never put it out in a public AI space?
Depends on the report.
Kind of where you are.
It depends on the report, and it depends on like what information you need to put in there. Once you get into kind of company specific or anything that would be the least bit
machine specific, even probably
proprietary. Yeah, I mean, that's where you get dangerous, because the hackers are good. That they are successful in what they do for a reason. And it's because they're smart, and they know exactly what to look for. So, just trying to be really, really mindful about things like that. I think I would be very cautious. I'm not saying it couldn't be done. If I saw the information, I was looking at it and going, right, there's literally nothing proprietary in this statement. But that kind of gets me to the point of, how much time is it saving me? If I've got to, really carefully evaluate what I'm putting into AI on, kind of all these specific steps, is it saving me time? At the end of the day, it depends on how many times I have to do it, right? So maybe
exactly. And that was
kind
of where I was, is anybody kind of going through that and going, well, I do it once, and then I realize I have a sample of 50. And so I just, I understand it, and that was kind of my question. Is anybody on the call doing that right now? And is there something that you're like, oh my gosh, this is such a great time saver? Because like I said, I'm still using it just as an English major, just as somebody that's kind of helping me, reword this and, change this from audit speak to regular person paragraph, type of thing.
Yeah, really at a high level, my use cases are like data manipulation. So I talked previously about the control database I'm creating, right? And so there was a lot of manipulation of like columns to rows and rows to columns and things like that. Really there. The other use case I have, like specifically for HITRUST purposes, is that there was a handful of controls. Actually, I don't even know if it's HITRUST or not. There was a control, forget where it came from. It's probably in my database somewhere, that talked about AI societal impacts, and there wasn't a description, and I didn't know what that meant. So I went to AI and I kept asking it in different ways until it phrased it in a way like, what does that actually mean? And even then, to you guys' point, I went back and I researched more to make sure the AI was right. Just because it's not trustworthy, it just will make up stuff. I'm not a fan of hallucinations. Just to, just to make sure that the request was fulfilled. Like, I don't, that's in my custom instructions now. Don't make up stuff. Like, it has to be factual. Like, your purpose is to fulfill truth as opposed to like the
Mm,
request.
mm. Well,
Yeah, because
I'm sure there's at least one lawyer who will always make sure that he or she includes that only include actual facts and
Yes.
cases, because I it was a news story. It's going back at least a year, I think, but a lawyer had AI or Chat GPT, whatever it was, come up with closing statements. And maybe it wasn't just closing statements. It was something where another case and case law was referenced, but the Chat GPT made it up.
Case didn't exist.
The case didn't exist. Um, so it was a bit of a sticking point.
well, and then you wonder if it's making it up, does it now exist as far as the other,
Right.
modules are concerned? Would you go to one of the other ones and go, okay, and they're like, yeah, this case, and you're like, it just got cited, but it doesn't really live
Yeah,
there anymore.
Still didn't
I
exist.
remember two examples where like I don't know if it was the one you're talking about or if it was a different one. So you know when you open up a book,
Mm,
right? So you have text on this side of the book and you have text on that side of the book, and there's
yeah.
like the difference between the pages. When the scanned page was read by AI, it read this word and this word as one thing and basically made up because that appeared to be one phrase or one word and it grouped it together. So as opposed to concept one and concept two, it grouped them together as concept three. And so then that
Oh,
thing that cited that source, whatever it said, like it might be Steve versus the state of Texas or something like that, as opposed to Steve Dufour, state of Texas, it grouped them together. So um, that was one case of why it did it. And then after that, a whole bunch of other sources cited that thing as a source, right? The other thing was reading some, I don't know, well, actually, I don't know if somebody sent it to me or if I just found it on my own, but a peer-reviewed journal submission that I was reading through had a whole bunch of like AI content in it. It had the prompts and responses back and forth inside the journal entry, inside the submission. And so I was like, oh, that's not good. So I contacted the company that was housing that, um, and let them know that they should probably review their stuff before putting it out in the open. And they said thanks. And that was about it.
these just feel like messes to clean up, It's just, it is, they're it's creating a bit of a mess, especially when you then get knock-on effects of other people now referencing things that weren't real to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you go back and prove or disprove the reality of a source
Right.
when,
When those
that's going to
modules
get
are coming back and saying it's here, it worked. It's
right, right. And the internet is so broad, and absolutely, I mean, it wasn't, so I didn't specifically use it when I was at college because it wasn't widely available except in the computer lab. So it was used a little bit, but very specific in terms of sources and stuff. I mean, we were just kind of, it was more about specific websites and specific companies rather than just kind of wider Google searches, which is certainly what I use now. And my kids are in school, and they go out and they're required to cite their sources, but there's sometimes there are parameters around them from the teachers, and sometimes there aren't. And how do you prove or disprove the sources that you're citing? How can I prove that guy did or did not exist in 1850, and that is or is not an actual depiction of this person? I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. And that's, I think that's going to get into a little bit more of a, how do we validate things that we're finding online that could just be made up,
Yeah.
and not anyway. Sorry, I don't know if I'm
No,
explaining it very well.
no, you nailed it. So it's a problem that's evolved over time. So back in the day, like I don't know what generation everybody's in, but you only had library books, and then you could like borrow from another library, but it had to be shipped there,
Mhm.
right? You had
Mhm.
encyclopedias,
Yes.
peer-reviewed journals, LexisNexis, right? Like
Yeah.
all these things that were trusted sources. And so let's just say our generation, for lack of a better word, our generation knew to cite a source, find it from reputable locations and things like
Mhm.
that, and how to do that. And then online content, with some of that,
Mhm.
um, I guess verification processes, right? And then now the age of misinformation coupled with AI creates a great learning opportunity for kids. So like
Mhm.
our school district around here, I talked to the school board about a path forward for, let's say, responsible AI in education, where
Mhm.
kids don't just use AI, but they use it in conjunction with skills that they could transfer and apply to other positions, including jobs,
Mhm.
right? So, like,
Yeah.
what's the phrase in security? Trust but verify. So, like, yes,
Trust and
you're going,
validate.
yeah, trust
Yeah.
and validate, right? So, just like my use case before, I'll ask AI a particular question, and then whatever it spits out, I'm going to go out and validate, and then also reframe to the context that I want to use it. So, I think it's really important for people that didn't necessarily grow up doing things manually, to get those skills that we got by doing things manually to, um, at least avoid or lessen the chance of some type of like harm coming. And it doesn't necessarily be, um, has to be something like a physical harm or something like that.
Mhm.
Like it can be like embarrassment, right?
Mhm.
So like you turn in your rough draft for your paper, and there's, like you said, there's three sources that just don't exist because the teacher knows how to verify sources, but the
Right.
student doesn't.
Right.
So that's a good learning opportunity in that particular instance, but it's also a good learning opportunity across the board because take
Mhm.
the educational example and then apply it to anything we do at work, right? So
Mhm.
like my mom's using AI now, right? It's like, so you have to tell her not necessarily how it works, but just things to be aware of, right?
Mhm.
And anybody at your respective companies who are using AI, hey, make sure that you don't upload sensitive content, no copyrighted content,
Mhm.
unless there's some type of agreement protecting particular data sets. Don't upload company policy or procedure, right?
Right.
Keep
Yep.
it high level, right?
Yeah.
Lots of educational opportunities across the board with AI. I still
Yeah.
don't trust it though. So
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm just even doing just a quick search and saying, hey, show me this high trust control or these high trust domains. I mean, it already has so
mhm.
much in it, and it's like, okay, it's not specific to a company other than, it's high trust, but I think there's, all these people that have pushed the high trust controls in there. Obviously not with the same ways of pulling down for an R2, and manipulating it for a specific instance. But, I wonder in those models how much is already out there. And,
Mhm.
you know, but
Yeah. That's it.
I was just
It's
wondering if
interesting.
anybody, yeah, I was just wondering if anybody has that. Oh my gosh, yeah, we use it as because I mean, started thinking about like what you were saying, Donna, about those vendors that promise, those high trust approved vendors that promise, you don't have to look at any of it. We'll take care of all of it. And how do they integrate into your systems? Like Vanta and ThoroughPass and things like that. They'll just be like, it's a hands-off audit. And I'm like, okay, well, they're obviously using it way more than me. And I know it's not the public, you know, artificial intelligence platforms that they're using. They've got their own proprietary, but I was just curious to see if anybody's like, oh my gosh, yeah, this makes my life so much easier. Or if it's kind of the way I'm using it is, I've got these three ingredients and, you know, what can I make for dinner?
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm biased, but I just don't like it.
Okay.
It's a personal threat, though. I mean, if it gets good enough to replace me looking at your stuff, it makes me nervous. So,
Mm.
I
Well,
think that's another educational opportunity too.
mm,
So let's say the people who potentially how can I phrase this? Trying to be politically correct because we're being recorded. The people who, let's just say, are the deciders, get all hyped up by the sales and marketing of whatever AI solution it happens to be,
Mhm.
and then make a decision that just doesn't fit with reality, right?
Mhm.
So what we're really talking about is accountability,
Mhm.
right? So Brian, Susan, Donna, myself, like all of us are accountable for our own actions, and we
Mhm.
can be coached and made better and right, like share our experiences. AI doesn't have experiences; it has math,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
And
and
what are you going to do? Fire the AI? You know
well,
what I mean?
and to Brian's point, where I've looked at it and said, because I've spent a number of years in digital agencies as well prior to crossing over from product management and digital platforms into the back end, the risk and compliance, the dark side, and working with tech folks and creative folks. There's a certain amount of fear in that industry. And I think it needs to be balanced. It's not that it's not scary, and I'm sure some of my concerns about AI may or may not be unfounded. But so I'm not saying I don't have concerns either, but I think it needs to be step forward to try and find that balance. Like I said, I tend to use it for things that are admin-y. The things that I have to do 100 or 200 or 500 times, in the given context of an assessment or whatever project is I'm doing, because those are huge time savers. Even the few hours or whatever it might take me to work through, because some of them are incredibly high volumes. You can only put so many through Chat GPT at a time. But picking and choosing the ones that are basic, that are going to save my client time and money. They're going to save me time and money. So those are benefit. And then being able to add my value, the things that AI can't do, and really bringing that in and going, okay, so I've seen this before. While I haven't seen exactly this new situation here, based on a couple of different things, this is how I think we could go or go. Actually, I'm just going to go ask HITRUST support on this, and get them to But understanding and interpreting those differences, or asking the assessors directly, going, how do you want to see this mapped out, and then working with the clients, to really bring that through. Or some of the automation that I'm doing, or process design, where I'm going, okay, let's line that up. I did a workshop a couple weeks ago. We got to the end. It was like a 3-hour workshop. A workshop where we literally went through each individual step in a process, because we're taking a 25-year-old law firm with ground up processes, and we needed to break it down into, right, how can we incorporate automation at the right points without putting a case on some sort of like freight train that's not going to stop, and the client's getting all sorts of emails and communications, and there's tasks going out, and they're not at the right point or the right time. And kind of going, right, okay, this is where we need a stopgap. Somebody human needs to look here, and somebody human needs to look here. So I think if we look at the opportunities, then we'll hit, collectively, the people who can look at those opportunities can hit a sweet spot, because it's not that you won't be going down the road of AI, but you'll be using it responsibly. The same with automation. And when automation first started, automated text messages and automated emails, and those still get out of hand. But using it responsibly at the right moments, and not, you know, at moments that are just going to dig a hole.
I hope it doesn't become used as part of the assessment process, and I worry about that as I'm watching other frameworks in their kind of race to the bottom. That
Yeah.
I don't ever want it to get to be the point where they fed it the CSV file of their Intune list and say, "Is this good?" And AI comes back and says, "Oh, it looks like everybody has antivirus." And I would never accept that as an assessor, but as that lowers the bottom end of what it costs to get an assessment done, is where I get worried about AI's
Yeah.
involvement. I won't, I won't even ask AI. I won't give your data to AI. But if you come back and somebody says, well, I gave it my YAML file and it says those machines are securely configured.
Yeah, that would be terrifying.
That's
But
kind of what, yeah.
how would that
That's kind
meet
of
the
what Audit
samples? Sorry, you go ahead, Susan.
No,
I've been chatting.
no, I was just saying that that's kind of what I was wondering if anybody's getting to that point because, some of these high trust assessors are promising that. And I was like, gosh, am I the dinosaur like left behind just treating Chat GPT like a middle schooler that can do some of the basic tasks for me, but I don't, I
Yeah.
still follow along behind and go, okay, did you do it right? Did you do it right? And I
Yeah.
mean, I even see that technology in cars. We had a loaner car and it's one of the newer ones. And so it actually will brake for you. So if you're coming up, to a car and I actually started relying on that. I started being like, I was in traffic and I was like, oh, let me just, ease off the gas and I'm like, oh, wait, I'm back in my car and I've got to actually push the brake as opposed to just easing off the gas because, it has crash detection and it would stop. It wouldn't, but it wasn't this nice, gentle, like this newer car had for my loaner. And I was like, kind of getting relying on that. And then I've taken a Tesla. I've never done the whole full auto driving, but that whole lane departure, that's kind of nice, when you're on a long trip and you're just like, or you have new drivers and it can nag them better than you as the parent going, move over, move over, move over. It's like, it's just kind of pushing you back over where you need to be. So
Yeah.
Is this a topic we can discuss like with like other people invited to present, like on any type of
yeah,
methodology
let
or
me check.
anything like that?
Yeah, let me check with this lady. Her name is Chelsea. She's very smart,
Yeah.
very, very smart. And I'll see
And
if she's where she
and
is with hers.
yeah, and I'd really like to challenge them because Inbold does have AI as part of its product. However, we did a really good job of creating the governance framework, taking into account security, privacy, compliance. We did a whole bunch of things like sure all the BAs are there and make sure all the outcomes are there. We went over the top in terms of testing to where we have on staff like a PhD statistician, right, who created the metrics to gauge something as successful or not, right? And like we're being very open and transparent internally as well as externally on our evaluations. So like we took it very seriously, and I would like to talk through somebody who's attempting this, even if it's just a beta, to see if they thought about, let's just say, quality metrics, right? Because when your reputation and also potentially certifications depend on the output of these products. I'd like to know like what the methodology is. Not even for judging purposes, just more like for knowledge purposes for use cases, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it would definitely be interesting. I mean, the challenge I've faced is that when people are new to high trust or they're too senior and haven't been in the weeds, quite frankly, they view high trust as 90% administrative, and you don't really need to know it. You just need to like follow the bouncing ball. And I can see that in some of the work. I'll say I have very high regard for assessors. Not all assessor organizations are created equal. And I have some that I would trust with my kids in terms of the quality and the way that they deliver, and others that I wouldn't leave an apple pie on the windowsill. Because, this has nothing to do with AI. It's just that the thought process from senior leadership is that they don't need skilled individuals. And even that I've seen over the past few years where they try and get very junior folks, inexpensive folks, very, very junior folks in doing a lot of the legwork on the assessment. They don't understand. They don't understand what they're looking at, and they don't understand the nuances of high trust versus a SOC 2. Like they're there's just too much of a gap in the knowledge. So, and that's where I don't know what that perfect solution is. Maybe there are AI solutions that could help do some of that baseline work, but there's also a gap on understanding exactly where that human expertise needs to come into place.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So we didn't solve the AI dilemma today, but we're going to work on it.
Or world hunger. We'll have to tackle them next time.
Exactly. Yeah, that's another one.
Small things,
Exactly. All right. Anybody have anything else? No. All right. Well, thanks again for being here, and I will not be on the next one on next week, but
Okay.
I am sure that we'll have good topics and lots of questions, and I will see you guys later. But thanks for
That
tuning
sounds
in.
good.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a great day.
Hey, thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. If you got value from this episode, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next HITRUST Secrets. We go live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central and dig into real-world compliance and security topics. And each session gets uploaded right here after the live show. So whether you're catching us live or on your own time, make sure you're subscribed. We'd love to have you along on your HITRUST journey.